My name is Celeste Navarro, and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my mother sat in a family mediator's office in Tucson, Arizona, and told a licensed counselor, 2 social workers, and my younger sister's foster placement coordinator that I had fabricated my nursing credentials, that I was emotionally unstable, and that the state of Arizona should not allow me to be the approved kinship caregiver for my sister's 2 children, a 4-year-old named Rosie and a 6-year-old named Marco. She had a folder in her lap. She had typed statements from 3 neighbors I hadn't spoken to in 11 years. She had a photograph she claimed showed me in a state of distress at a family gathering in 2016. What she did not have was the letter my grandmother wrote in 2019, sealed with a strip of clear tape over her signature, and left with her attorney in a manila envelope marked for Celeste, "Open when the children need you." She did not have the 41 months of documentation I had kept in a green canvas binder since the first time my sister called me from a gas station bathroom at 2 in the morning. She did not have the licensing board's written confirmation, dated September 4th of this year, that my nursing credentials were not only valid but that I had received a commendation for clinical excellence 2 years running at Sonoran Valley Medical Center. But here is what my mother did not know when she walked into that mediator's office. I had been in contact with the placement coordinator for 7 weeks before that meeting. I had already submitted my kinship application. I had already passed the home study. And the letter from my grandmother, the one she wrote 3 years before she died, had already been entered into the official case file. Before I tell you what happened in that room, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely speaks to you. Drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I read every single one, and knowing where you're watching from means more to me than I can say. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a yellow house on a street called Mesquite Drive in Tucson, Arizona, and a family that taught me, very early, exactly how conditional love could be. My mother, Gloria Navarro, was the kind of woman who made things look effortless from the outside. She kept a clean house. She brought tamales to the church potluck. She smiled at the right moments and cried at the right funerals. She had a gift for performance that I did not fully understand until I was old enough to see behind it. My father, Ernesto, worked long shifts at a sheet metal fabrication plant on the south side of Tucson. He came home smelling of iron and machine oil, ate quietly, and deferred to my mother on everything that happened inside the house. He was not a cruel man. He was an absent one, even when he was sitting 3 feet away from you at the dinner table. There were 3 of us children. Me, the oldest. My brother Tomas, 2 years younger than me. And then Yolanda, 7 years younger than me, born when I was in 2nd grade and our mother was 31. From the beginning, the arithmetic of that household was not equal. Tomas was the son, which meant he carried a particular kind of weight in our mother's eyes. She tracked his grades, attended every one of his baseball games, ironed his shirts for school pictures. When Tomas got a C in algebra in 7th grade, my mother hired a tutor. When I got a C in chemistry in 9th grade, she told me I probably wasn't cut out for science anyway and suggested I think about something practical, like cosmetology. I was 12 when I first understood the shape of it. My grandmother, my father's mother, Abuela Consuelo, came to stay with us for 6 weeks that summer while she recovered from a hip replacement. She slept in the room across from mine. Every morning she would be awake before anyone else, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a small leather-bound notebook she carried everywhere. She wrote in it with a black fountain pen. I asked her once what she was writing. "Everything I see," she said. A woman who pays attention is a woman who cannot be fooled. Abuela Consuelo was 71 that summer, short and deliberate, with silver hair she kept in a braid down her back. She had raised 4 children mostly alone after my grandfather died young, had worked 30 years as a medical transcriptionist, and had, in her retirement, become a notary public because, she told me, someone in every family needs to know how documents work. She watched my mother the way a person watches weather. Quiet, attentive, not alarmed but not unprepared. One evening near the end of her stay, she sat on the edge of my bed while I was doing homework and said something I have thought about almost every day since. "Celeste," she said, "some people in this life will try to make you small so they don't have to feel the size of what they are. Don't let them measure you. You do the measuring." I wrote it down in my own notebook that night. I still have that notebook. It is sitting on the shelf above my desk as I tell you this. Yolanda was born in October of that same year. A beautiful baby, everyone said so. I thought so too. I was 7 years older than her, which meant I was old enough to help and young enough to be given no credit for it. By the time Yolanda was 4, I was doing the majority of her after-school care because my mother had gone back to work part-time at a dental office. I didn't resent it. I loved Yolanda. She had this way of laughing that started in her whole body before it reached her face. She called me Cece before she could say my full name, and the name stuck. What I did resent, though I didn't have the language for it until much later, was the way my mother accepted my labor without acknowledging it. Not a thank you, not a recognition. Just an expectation, as steady and invisible as gravity. When I was 16, I told my mother I wanted to be a nurse. I had been volunteering at a pediatric clinic on Saturday mornings for 8 months. I had read every book in the school library on anatomy and physiology. I had already spoken to my school counselor about pre-nursing programs. My mother looked up from the magazine she was reading and said, "Nurses clean up other people's messes. Is that really what you want to do with your life?" I said yes. She went back to her magazine. Tomas, 2 years later, announced he wanted to study business administration at the University of Arizona. My mother called 3 of her sisters that same evening to share the news. I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice bright and proud in a way I had never once heard her use for me. I applied to the nursing program at Arizona State University on my own, filled out every financial aid form myself, researched every scholarship I was eligible for. I was accepted in March of my senior year of high school. I told my parents at dinner. My father nodded and said, "That's good, Mija." My mother said, "You'll need to figure out the money yourself. We're saving for Tomas's MBA." Tomas had not yet completed his undergraduate degree. I did figure out the money myself. federal loans, 2 part-time jobs, a university grant, and a small scholarship from a local nursing association. I moved into a shared apartment in Tempe with 3 other nursing students in August. I called home every Sunday. My mother answered about half the time. Abuela Consuelo called me every single Sunday without exception. She asked about my clinical rotations, my professors, the patients I was allowed to assist with. She asked about my roommates and whether I was eating enough and whether the Arizona sun was bothering my skin. She asked about my dreams. Not my career dreams, my actual sleeping dreams. She believed they told you things. She also, I would learn much later, called her attorney on a Tuesday in November of my freshman year and made an addition to her estate documents. I did not know this at the time. I was studying for a pharmacology exam and eating a bowl of cereal for dinner in a kitchen that smelled of someone else's cooking. What I know now is that she saw what was coming long before I did. The wound, when it finally arrived, did not look the way I expected wounds to look. It did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It arrived slowly, over 3 years, and then all at once. Yolanda was 19 when she got into trouble the first time. She had been living at home after a difficult year at community college, working at a coffee shop, spending time with people my mother described as not our kind of people in a tone that made me want to drive to Tucson and sit with my sister for a week. I couldn't. I was in my second year of nursing, working nights at a hospital in Phoenix, sleeping 4 hours at a stretch. Yolanda called me on a Wednesday in February. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She had been arrested for possession. Minor charge, first offense, but she was terrified. I drove to Tucson the next morning. I sat with her at the kitchen table while my mother stood at the counter with her back to both of us and said, "This is what happens when you don't listen." I found Yolanda a public defender. I went with her to every court appearance. The charge was reduced and she was assigned to a diversion program. I drove her to those appointments too, on my days off, 4 hours round trip. My mother told people at church that Yolanda was going through something. She did not tell them I was the one driving her to and from the program every week. She did not tell them anything about me at all. Over the next 4 years, Yolanda tried hard. She really did. She got her GED, enrolled in a medical assistant certification program, met a man named Dario who I liked immediately because he made her laugh the way she used to laugh as a child. They got an apartment together. She got pregnant with Marco in 2018. She called me first, before anyone else, and she was happy. I was happy for her. But Dario had problems I didn't fully understand until Marco was 8 months old. He lost his job, then another. There were arguments Yolanda described in fragments over the phone. By the time Rosie was born in 2020, Dario was gone, and Yolanda was alone with 2 children under 3, working part-time, and living in an apartment she could barely afford. I helped where I could. I sent money when I had it. I drove down on weekends. I kept Marco for 2 weeks one summer so Yolanda could work extra shifts. I kept a notebook, a green canvas binder, actually, that I bought at a drugstore in Phoenix, where I wrote down dates, amounts, conversations. Not because I was building a case. I was a nurse. Documentation was just how I thought. You write things down so you remember them accurately. You write things down because memory is fallible and paper is not. In the spring of 2022, Yolanda had a breakdown. I don't use that word casually. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped answering her phone for 11 days. A neighbor called Child Protective Services. Marco and Rosie were placed in emergency foster care on April 3, 2022. Yolanda was hospitalized on April 5. I found out on April 6, when a social worker named Patricia Odom called my cell phone and told me that my sister had listed me as her emergency contact and that the children were in temporary placement and that I had the right to apply as a kinship caregiver if I was interested and able. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you watching this know exactly what that phone call feels like. Not the specific facts of it, but the weight. The way your whole body goes still while your mind is already 3 steps ahead, already calculating what needs to happen, already making the list. If you have ever been the one in your family who shows up, the one who drives 4 hours on a day off, the one who sits in the waiting room, the one who keeps the notebook, I want you to drop the word present in the comments right now. Just that one word. Because I think you know what it costs to be the person who stays, and I think you deserve to be seen for it. And if this story is resonating with you, please subscribe. I put everything I have into these stories, and knowing you're here makes it worth every word. Now, back to the story. The kinship placement process is not fast. There is a home study, background checks, financial review, interviews, reference letters, a safety inspection of your home. I had moved to Tucson 8 months earlier, partly to be closer to Yolanda, partly because a position opened at Sonoran Valley Medical Center that I genuinely wanted. I had a 2-bedroom apartment, a clean record, stable employment as a registered nurse with 7 years of experience, and a history of documented involvement in my nieces' and nephews' lives that went back to the week Marco was born. I submitted my kinship application on April 14, 2022. The home study was completed on May 9. I passed every component. What I did not know, while all of this was happening, was that my mother had submitted her own kinship application on April 22. I found out from Patricia Odom, who called me on a Tuesday morning in late May with a careful, neutral tone that told me something complicated was coming. I want to make sure you're aware, she said, that another family member has also applied for placement. The department will be evaluating both applications and will make a recommendation based on the best interest of the children. I asked who. She said she couldn't tell me. I knew. My mother had not called me once since Marco and Rosie were placed. She had not called Yolanda in the hospital. She had not called Patricia Odom until 3 weeks after the placement, which I know because Patricia told me, without naming names, that the second application came in after the initial placement period. My mother had waited to see which way the wind was blowing. Then she filed. I did not call her. I did not confront her. I went back to my green canvas binder and I started organizing. I had 41 months of documentation. Dates and amounts of money sent to Yolanda. Dates and times I had driven to Tucson. Photographs of Marco and Rosie at my apartment, time-stamped. Text messages from Yolanda referencing my help, saved and printed. A letter from Yolanda's therapist, Dr. Anita Flores, confirming that Yolanda had identified me as her primary support person and that she wished for her children to be placed with me. My employment records. My performance reviews. The commendation letter from Sonoran Valley's chief nursing officer, dated February 2022, 2 months before any of this began. I also called my grandmother's attorney. Abuela Consuelo had died in January of 2021, 14 months before Marco and Rosie were placed. She had been 90 years old, and she had been sharp and present until the very end. At her bedside in the last weeks, she had held my hand and said, "You're going to need to be brave in a way that doesn't look like bravery. The quiet kind. The kind that keeps its hands steady." Her attorney was a woman named Ruth Esperanza, who practiced estate law out of a small office on 4th Avenue in Tucson. I had met her once, briefly, at my grandmother's funeral. She had pressed a business card into my hand and said, "Your grandmother asked me to give you this. She said you'd know when to call." I called Ruth Esperanza on a Thursday morning in June, 2 weeks after Patricia Odom told me about the competing application. I told her what was happening. She said, "I've been waiting for this call. Come in on Friday." I sat across from Ruth Esperanza in her office on a Friday afternoon in June. The office smelled of old paper and the faint sweetness of a candle that had recently been blown out. On her desk was a manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Underneath my name, in smaller letters, she had written, "Open when the children need you." Ruth slid it across the desk. "She updated her letter in 2019, Ruth said. She told me she'd watched your family for a long time and she wanted to make sure the right things were in writing." I opened the envelope. My grandmother's letter was 4 pages, handwritten in the same neat, deliberate script she had used in that leather notebook when I was 12 years old. I am not going to read you every word of it, because some of it is mine to keep. But I will tell you what mattered for what came next. My grandmother had written, in specific and careful language, about what she had observed over 20 years. She wrote about the inequity she had witnessed in how her son's children were treated. She wrote about my involvement in Yolanda's life, documented with dates and details that matched my own binder almost entry for entry. She wrote about my mother's pattern of claiming credit for others' labor and positioning herself as indispensable while doing the least. She wrote about the specific incident in 2016, the photograph my mother had brought to the mediator's office, and she described what had actually happened that day, that I had been crying because my grandmother had just told me she had been diagnosed with a heart condition, and that my mother had taken that photograph without my knowledge and had shown it to relatives as evidence that I was unstable. My grandmother had been present. She had seen it happen. She had written it down. The letter concluded, "I do not write this out of bitterness. I write it because I have learned that the truth, left undocumented, has a way of being replaced by whatever story is most convenient for the people in power. Celeste has never been in power in this family. I am giving her what I can. I am giving her the record. At the bottom of the envelope, behind the letter, was a notarized affidavit. My grandmother had signed it in 2019 in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. It described, in formal legal language, everything the letter described in personal language. Ruth Esperanza had prepared it. My grandmother had signed it. It had been sitting in that envelope for 4 years, waiting. I did not cry in Ruth's office. I sat very still and I read the letter twice and then I put it back in the envelope and I held it in both hands for a moment. My hands did not shake. I noticed that. What do we do with this? I asked. Ruth said, we submit it to the case file. The affidavit is admissible. The letter is supporting context. Combined with your documentation, it gives the placement coordinator a complete picture. My mother doesn't know this exists, I said. No, Ruth said. Your grandmother made sure of that. I submitted the full package to Patricia Odom on a Monday morning, the green canvas binder with 41 months of documentation, the commendation letter, Yolanda's therapist's statement, my employment records, and the manila envelope from my grandmother, including both the personal letter and the notarized affidavit. I included a cover letter that was 3 paragraphs long, factual, and did not contain a single word about my mother. Patricia Odom called me 4 days later. She said the department had reviewed both applications and that a formal meeting had been scheduled for September 18 to finalize the placement recommendation. She said both applicants had been invited to attend and that a family mediator would be present along with 2 senior social workers and the placement coordinator. She said, in the careful neutral tone I had come to recognize, I want you to know that the documentation you submitted was thorough. I've been doing this work for 14 years and I don't often see a package that complete. I said thank you. She said, bring it all with you on the 18th. September 18th was a Wednesday. I arrived at the Family Services building on Speedway Boulevard at 8:47 in the morning, 17 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. I wore gray slacks and a white blouse and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me on my 21st birthday. I carried the green canvas binder and a second folder, cream-colored, that contained Ruth Esperanza's copy of the affidavit and a letter Ruth had written on firm letterhead explaining the provenance of the document. I sat in the waiting area and I did not look at my phone. I breathed slowly. I thought about my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table with her black fountain pen and her leather notebook. I thought about Marco's laugh and the way Rosie said my name, Cece, the same way her mother had said it 30 years ago. I thought about the green canvas binder and what it represented, 41 months of showing up, of driving, of sitting in waiting rooms, of making sure 2 small children knew that someone in their family was paying attention. At 8:59, my mother walked in. She came with Tomas, which I had not expected. He was wearing a collared shirt and carrying a folder of his own, and when he saw me he looked away quickly in a way that told me he had known I would be there and had decided in advance not to acknowledge me. My mother saw me immediately. She stopped walking for just a moment. 1 second. Maybe 2. And then she arranged her face into something that was not quite a smile and not quite surprise and walked past me toward the reception desk. She was wearing a black blazer and a cream-colored blouse. Her hair was done. She had brought the folder. I counted 8 seconds. Then I looked back down at my hands. The conference room was small and fluorescent lit, with a rectangular table and 6 chairs. Patricia Odom sat at the head of the table. Beside her were 2 colleagues she introduced as senior placement specialists, a woman named Diane Kowalski and a man named Robert Yee. The family mediator, a soft-spoken man named James Aldridge who had a yellow legal pad in front of him, sat to Patricia's left. My mother and Tomas sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other. Patricia Odom opened the meeting by explaining the process. Both parties had submitted applications. The department had reviewed all documentation. This meeting was an opportunity for both parties to speak to their applications and for the department to ask clarifying questions before making a final recommendation to the court. She said it calmly and procedurally, and when she finished, she looked at my mother and said, "Mrs. Navarro, would you like to begin?" My mother began. She spoke for approximately 9 minutes. I know it was 9 minutes because I watched the clock on the wall above Patricia's head. She described herself as a devoted grandmother who had been a stabilizing presence in Yolanda's life. She described her home, her availability, her willingness to provide a stable environment. She said that she had concerns about my suitability as a caregiver. She said I had a history of emotional instability. She said I had been estranged from the family for years. She said I was a single woman with demanding work hours and no experience raising children. Then she opened her folder. She had the typed statements from 3 neighbors. She had a printed email she claimed showed that I had refused to help during a family crisis in 2019. She had the photograph. She slid the photograph across the table toward Patricia Odom. "This was taken in 2016, she said. At a family gathering. As you can see, Celeste was in clear emotional distress. This is a pattern." Patricia Odom looked at the photograph. Then she looked at me. I did not say anything yet. I waited. Tomas added, briefly, that he supported his mother's application and that he had concerns about my reliability. He said it in the tone of a man reading from a script he had memorized the night before. James Aldridge, the mediator, asked my mother several clarifying questions. He asked about her relationship with Marco and Rosie over the past year. She said she had visited them several times. He asked for dates. She gave 3. He wrote them down. Then Patricia Odom said, "Ms. Navarro, Celeste, would you like to respond?" I said yes. I opened the green canvas binder. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at my mother while I spoke, except when I was directly addressing something she had said. I spoke to Patricia Odom and Diane Kowalski and Robert Yee and James Aldridge, because they were the people whose judgment mattered in that room. I started with the documentation. I said that the binder contained 41 months of records, beginning in November 2018, of my involvement in my sister's life and in the lives of her children. I said the records included dates, amounts, and descriptions of every visit, every financial transfer, every court or medical appointment I had attended or facilitated. I said that a summary index was on the first page and that I had prepared individual tabs for each calendar year. I slid the binder to Patricia. She opened it. She passed it to Diane Kowalski. Then I addressed the photograph. I said that the photograph had been taken on October 9, 2016, at my grandmother Consuelo Navarro's 75th birthday gathering. I said that I had been crying in that photograph because, approximately 20 minutes before it was taken, my grandmother had told me privately that she had been diagnosed with a cardiac condition and that her doctors had advised her to reduce stress significantly. I said that I had stepped outside to compose myself and that my mother had taken the photograph without my knowledge. I said that I knew this because my grandmother had documented it. I opened the cream-colored folder and I slid Ruth Esperanza's cover letter across the table, followed by the notarized affidavit. Patricia Odom read the cover letter. She passed it to Robert Yee. She began reading the affidavit. The room was very quiet. My mother said, "What is that?" I said, "That is a notarized affidavit prepared by my grandmother, Consuelo Navarro, in 2019, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary public. It describes, among other things, the circumstances of that photograph." My mother said, "I've never seen that document." "No," I said. "You haven't." I want to stop here for just a moment, because I think some of you know what it feels like to sit in a room and finally have something in your hands that proves what you always knew was true. Not to wave it in anyone's face. Not to be cruel. But just to have it. To hold it. To know that someone who loved you saw what was happening and thought ahead, thought carefully, thought about you specifically. If you have ever had someone in your life who prepared for you, who left something behind for you, who saw you clearly when no one else did, type the word witness in the comments. Because that is what my grandmother was. She was my witness. And she made sure her testimony would outlast her. If this story is reaching you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. These stories matter. You matter. Now, back to that conference room. Patricia Odom finished reading the affidavit. She set it down and looked at Diane Kowalski, who had also been reading over her shoulder. Something passed between them. Not a word, just a look. The kind of look that professionals exchange when a situation has just become significantly clearer. James Aldridge asked my mother if she had any response to the affidavit. My mother said, "That's not accurate." My mother-in-law had memory issues in her final years. I said, quietly, "The affidavit was signed in 2019. My grandmother's attending physician at that time was Dr. Miriam Castillo at Tucson Medical Center. Her records from that year show no diagnosis of cognitive impairment. I have a copy of the relevant portion of her medical summary, which her attorney obtained with appropriate authorization. It is in the folder. I slid the last document across the table. My mother said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "This is a family matter. It should be handled by family." Patricia Odom said, gently but clearly, "Mrs. Navarro, this is a child placement proceeding. The welfare of Marco and Rosie is our only consideration." My mother looked at me then. Really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I could see her calculating. I could see her looking for the angle, the way she always had, the way she had looked at situations her entire life to find the place where she could position herself most favorably. She did not find it. Tomas put his hand on her arm. She shook it off. She said, "I am their grandmother. I have rights." Patricia Odom said that the department would take everything under advisement and that a formal recommendation would be submitted to the court within 10 business days. The meeting ended at 10:23 in the morning. My mother stood up quickly and walked out without looking at me. Tomas followed her. I heard her voice in the hallway, low and tight, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't try. I sat for a moment after they left. Patricia Odom was gathering her papers. Diane Kowalski caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Not unprofessional, just human. The kind of nod that says, "I see you." I picked up my binder and my folder. I thanked Patricia and her colleagues. I walked out into the September morning, and the Tucson sun hit me full in the face, warm and indifferent and bright. I sat in my car for a few minutes. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her sitting at that kitchen table when I was 12, writing in her notebook with her black pen. I thought about her saying, "A woman who pays attention is a woman who cannot be fooled." I thought about her updating that affidavit in 2019, 2 years before she died, because she was paying attention and she wanted to make sure I wasn't fooled either. I did not cry in the car. I breathed. I looked out the windshield at the parking lot and the pale blue sky above it. Then I drove to work. The department's formal recommendation came on September 30th, 12 days after the meeting. Patricia Odom called me at 4:15 in the afternoon. She said the department was recommending placement with me, effective October 14th, pending court approval. She said the court review was scheduled for October 7th and that she did not anticipate any complications. She said, "I want to be straightforward with you. The documentation you submitted was the most complete kinship file I have processed in 14 years. It told a clear story. The affidavit was significant. But honestly, the 41 months of records were what made the difference. Anyone can make claims. You had dates." I said, "My grandmother taught me to write things down." She said, "She taught you well." The court approved the placement on October 7th. Marco and Rosie came to live with me on October 14th, a Tuesday. I had painted Rosie's room a soft yellow because she had told me once, on a video call, that yellow was her favorite color. Marco's room had a shelf I had built myself, slightly uneven but sturdy, for the books and the small collection of rocks he had been accumulating since he was 3. When they walked in the front door, Rosie went straight to her room and stood in the doorway and said, "Cece, it's yellow." Like she had expected something ordinary and found something extraordinary instead. Marco stood in the living room and looked around carefully, the way he always did in new spaces, taking inventory. Then he looked at me and said, "Is this ours now?" I said, "This is yours." He nodded, satisfied, and went to find his room. I stood in the hallway between their two rooms and listened to them moving around, opening drawers, testing beds, discovering the small things I had put in place for them. My hands were steady. My chest was full of something I don't have a precise word for. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was part of it. More like recognition. Like arriving somewhere you have been traveling toward for a very long time without knowing exactly where you were going. My mother did not contact me after the placement. Not directly. Tomas sent me a text message 11 days later that said, "I hope you know what you're doing." I read it once and did not respond. 3 months after that, Tomas called me on a Sunday evening. He did not apologize immediately. He talked around the edges for a while, asking about Marco and Rosie, asking about Yolanda, who was doing significantly better and was working with Dr. Flores on a long-term treatment plan and had already had 2 supervised visits with her children that had gone beautifully. Then Tomas went quiet for a moment and said, "I should have said something." At the meeting. I should have said something a long time before that. I said, "Yes." He said, "I know that's not enough." I said, "It's a start." We talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest real conversation we had had in years. I don't know what it will become. I am not in the business of predicting what people are capable of. I only know what they do. My mother has not called. I do not expect her to. I have thought about this carefully, and I have made my peace with it in the way you make peace with a wound that has healed but left a scar. The scar is not the wound. The scar is just the record. Yolanda is working toward reunification. It is a slow process, the right kind of slow. She calls me every Sunday now, the same day Abuela Consuelo used to call me. I don't think she knows that. Maybe she does. Either way, I pick up every time. Marco lost his first tooth in November and put it in a small glass jar on his shelf next to a piece of rose quartz he found in the backyard. Rosie has decided she wants to be a veterinarian and has begun interviewing me about whether nurses and veterinarians have anything in common. I tell her yes, more than you'd think. She finds this very satisfying. I keep the green canvas binder on the shelf above my desk, next to the notebook from when I was 12. I don't open it often. I don't need to. But I keep it because my grandmother was right, the truth, left undocumented, has a way of being replaced by whatever story is most convenient for the people in power. I am not in power in the way my mother understood power, the kind that comes from controlling the narrative, from managing what other people know and believe. But I have something she never accounted for. I have the record. I have 41 months of dates and amounts and conversations written in plain handwriting in a green canvas binder. I have a notarized affidavit from a woman with a black fountain pen and a leather notebook who sat at a kitchen table and paid attention for 70 years. I have 2 children who call me Cece and know that this house is theirs. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If you are watching this and you are the person in your family who shows up, the one who drives the distance, keeps the records, stays when everyone else leaves, I want you to hear this directly: your consistency is not invisible, even when the people around you refuse to see it. The record exists. The truth exists. And sometimes, the people who love you most are the ones who write it down before they go, because they know you're going to need it someday. You are not crazy for remembering what happened. You are not dramatic for keeping the documentation. You are not cruel for letting the truth speak for itself when the moment finally comes. The quiet kind of brave is still brave. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Hit subscribe if you want to be here for the next story. And I'll see you in the next one.